How to teach poetry. The suspension of disbelief. If you have ever tried to teach poetry, I mean teach it and make it an experience where students discover that poetry is word magic. Magic that makes them think of what spells and incantations do, like open doors and bring things into reality. If you've ever gone for it like that, then you know how difficult teaching poetry really is. It is, in fact, almost impossible. Teaching poetry is so off-putting, like teaching grammar is or logic is. I teach both and fail usually at them, in that I never convince students that the topics aren't vapid or merely matters of fact. And when you fail like that with poetry, when they sit and stare back at you like Hasbro G.I. Joes, it hurts more because it's poetry. A proposition is the square of opposition. Perfect passive participles or conjunctions, functions are one thing, but Frost's figure for the burgeoning power of spring in the line, "Give the buried flower a dream," that is sacred. I'm convinced that the experience of failure in teaching poetry is so thoroughgoing for most of us that we have given up trying. And those that haven't given up, they either elevate poetry to the realm of the sublime beyond all reality, or subordinate it to the grind of metrical analysis and the ringing of the lines to ruin for meaning and metonymy, assonance, synecdoche, and other devices too fierce to mention. Contributing endlessly to the frustration of the work of teaching poetry is the attitude of students toward poetry. The best of them treat lines like Rorschach tests or Sudoku puzzles, and the worst of them read themselves into every figure, conceit, and comma. Or rather, they read how they have learned to talk about themselves from TikTok reels, weekly therapy, and chats about SSRI levels with their doctor. Alas, the closest poetry they've yet come. But in the face of it all, what I have found more or less consistent among the most recalcitrant students, and that's nearly every poetry student, is that they can't believe that meaning is stacked and vacuum packed like Tetris times 1,000 in the lines and stanzas, rhymes and schemes of the strong poetry that they read. They just don't believe it. That is why they all, 9 students out of 10, avert on a dime to radical relativity and apocalyptic postmodern agnosticism anytime lines of poetry are read. In my opinion, that's what the poet means, is effectively the only comment. But they don't think that. It's not their opinion. What they really believe is that there is no meaning in the poem at all. Students are not naturally relativist. They have to be taught that in college. But they are naturally self-centered and partial to the ignorance in the light of which they have learned to enjoy life. And what they see when they read strong poetry, as in Frost's Flower Gathering, all for me and not a question for the faded flowers gay, that can take you from beside me for the hours of a day, is nothing. Nothing at all. And certainly nothing to do with them. What most students are pretty sure that they know for sure is that poetry is not meaningful for them, not important, not real. And this is the first obstacle to clear with the class in order to teach poetry. Shakespeare has the evil Iago say, "I did say so, look where he comes," remarking how Iago virtually spoke into existence jealousy, vengeance, and murder. Hell and night must bring this monstrous birth to the world's light, and indeed it did. When students see lines and stanzas as incantations that, when spoken, bring into existence thoughts and opinions, facets of the world that had been sparkling in front of their faces, but not yet seen, and that is what good poetry does, then we can just begin, teaching them poetry. Clear that hurdle, gain the suspension of disbelief, and you have entered an entirely alternate playing field with poetry in your class.